the person. Great, thank you.
Sorry about that.
No worries. But for the adjunct faculty or searched or startup funded research faculty position, and then into an assistant professorship position. So I think with that in mind, now I think it would be helpful to go back through the panelists again and ask a little bit more for you to share about your specific position. Everyone's done with fellowship, but I think in terms of being between this adjunct faculty or faculty position, I think we have a range of experiences, and that will be helpful. I think the other thing I wanted to say is for all of the attendees, please feel free to put questions in the chat. I'm lucky here, I should have said this, to be supported by my co-physician scientist cafe colleagues who are Dr. David McCulley and Dr. Misty Good, who in some ways need no introduction because they are outstanding and well-known neonatal physician scientists. But yeah, let me give them a shout out and say that they're also going to be monitoring the chat. Okay, apologies for talking too much. Boonmi, please take it away.
So the question is where we are currently. So I am currently somewhere in between adjunct faculty and faculty. I think at our institution, I think adjunct faculty is instructor. So I'm officially an instructor, but hoping to be an assistant professor here very shortly. And yeah, did you just want a short answer or a long answer?
Yeah, thank you. I guess a follow-up question, if that's permitted, but I'm the moderator, so it's permitted, is so you're currently in a mentor's lab, but looking to start your own independent research group.
Right. So I'm currently in a lab, in Dr. Konakova's lab. It was a lab I joined in fellowship that actually then sort of like, as my fellowship was ending, the lab itself moved from University of Pittsburgh to Yale, and there was an opportunity for a postdoc a postdoc position with like some clinical service time. And so that's how I started out. And then I'm still in the lab, and I think it's probably going to be transitioning to a junior faculty role within the lab though.
Cool. Do you have one final question? Do you have any external funding currently?
Yes, I do. So I'm currently funded by an institutional K. I think it's like a K-12 or some institutions here, it's a KL2. And I submitted a KO8. I resubmitted a KO8 earlier this year that should be getting funded at the beginning of next year. So that's sort of where I am.
Yeah, bravo. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I think relevant to the topic of this discussion. Lila, want to go next?
Sure. So I am currently at the instructor level here. I'm in my second year being an attending, so I'm in my pre-K timeframe. I currently have support through institutional funding through a physician scientist institutional award that's supported by the Burroughs Wellcome Fund, which was actually founded by Misty. And I know there are other institutions that have similar award programs as well. And then during fellowship, I was supported by an institutional T32, followed by an individual F32, as well as the AAP's Marshall Class Award. So I'm happy to talk about, kind of that pre-K timeframe.
Thanks, Lila, and congrats on all of your funding. That's very impressive. I think it also speaks to the fact that studying diseases that affect neonates, if you can put together a good proposal, I found is very compelling. So there's hope for everybody who's earlier in the stage. Pamela, do you mind going next?
Just reminding myself to unmute. Yeah. So I did my training here at Columbia. I am currently I'm an assistant professor, and I am still in my mentor's lab. I am in my I can't remember if it's my third or fourth year out of fellowship. But like Betsy, I was part of the Pediatric Scientist Development Program. And so that funded the 2 years of my fellowship postdoc, as well as transitioned me into an extra year as an instructor. And then I went through my pre-K time, and I've now been K08 awarded since 2023, sometime after January. And I also have an institutional grant grant that helps support my work as well.
Also, congratulations on all of your success, and thank you for sharing. We'll look forward to hearing more about your advice for all of those funding mechanisms. And John.
Yeah, thanks. A lot of similar awards will come up here. So I'm going to go chronologically, I guess, to keep everything straight. So I did the a little different than everybody else. I did the accelerated research pathway. So I had a 4th year of fellowship. It was kind of like a building towards faculty year. I was supported by an F-32 during my last 2 years of fellowship. And then as I started on faculty, I was on an institutional K-12 for 2 years. Now I'm in my 3rd year faculty, and I'm on a individual K-08. I just started my own lab like a week ago. So just branched out from my mentor's lab, and I have an R01 that I submitted in June. So hearing back about that in a short time frame here.
Wonderful. Also, so many congratulations. John and I met at one of the AAP conferences before COVID, and it's really nice to hear about all of your success.
Yeah, good to see you again too.
Okay, so I think now we'll get into some of the meat of the discussion. Here were the topics, subtopics that we plan to discuss today, and I put some of our panelists as like specific point people for each one of these topics, but we will try to be just keeping in the interest of time, spend about 10 minutes on each subtopic, and then have some minutes for, questions from the audience at the end. So I think, again, thinking chronologically, because that's how a lot of us think about our career trajectory. So if you're a person who is nearing the end of fellowship or who has finished fellowship and is trying to think about how to maneuver yourself for a research position, I think one of the very hot topics is how to fund yourself. This was definitely something that was top of my mind when I was in this stage. And we have, lots of good, as we were talking about this before the session, there were lots of good ideas and specific funding sources that came up. Dr. Good, you have Pamela Good, I should specify, as opposed to Dr. Misty Good.
I forgot about that. That's great.
Yeah, I was saying it was lucky for our babies that we have 2 excellent Dr. Goods in the field. Do you want to start off, and then we'll keep going with our panelists.
So I think a lot of us, in talking a little bit about how we got where we are, have mentioned some of the funding mechanisms that helped support us along the way. And a lot of institutions, and I have to be very transparent that I have done all of my training at Columbia, but a lot of institutions have the types of opportunities that have come up. John mentioned an F-32, there's also T-32s. So thinking as you're getting ready to head towards sort of the end years of your fellowship about what types of internal funding mechanisms there may be at your home institution that could give you a little bit more time for example, an extra research year, or a little bit of extra time to get your project moved along to the next level, so you may be ready to submit a larger grant sooner. And then other things to think about on top of some of the training grants that exist in many institutions is smaller foundation grants or institutional grants as well. So many small foundations have funding opportunities for people either at the end of their fellowship or as early junior faculty members. And many institutions really want to support physician scientists, and so they have sort of bridge funding out there. So small grants that can help support you in that time before you get your own larger grant. And my mentor always told me that the only grant you'll never get is the one you don't apply for. And so that sort of has been inspirational to me, because it took me years to get the institutional grant that I have now. I think I applied maybe 3 times for it, but every time my application got stronger, and it was great practice for when I was able to put together my K-08 award, and now it's able to help support some side projects and support a part-time research technician, which has really helped me move things forward. And so I think, my other piece of advice for the how to fund yourself post-fellowship pre-K is really looking hard for lots of opportunities and applying as much as you can, and knowing that even if you don't get everything that you apply for, it's sort of money in the bank going forward.
Thank you. I think those are all, high points. Apply early and often. I have a colleague who says that getting funding is just shots on goal. So the more shots you take, the more goals you score. It's not that simple, but I think it is a factor. Lila, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm definitely in a more earlier stage of my career that I think most folks on the Zoom. And so for those who might be still in fellowship, I think one of the most important things is having just early discussions with your mentor and with your program director, your chief or your chair, just about your intentions of pursuing an investigator pathway. And from there, getting help, identifying these smaller foundational grants or through different societies like the AAP or Society for Pediatric Research that might have, funding mechanisms that are targeted towards fellows that then can set you up to, apply for larger awards in the future. I really found a lot of value in applying for an F-32, which gave me a lot of grant writing practice and really was motivating to get protected research time during fellowship and in the early career period. So that is something I highly recommend. And then any other institutional funding, such as these physician scientist institutional awards or pilot and feasibility grants that different research cores or research centers within an institution might have. And then as you move in towards more early career, junior faculty staging, thinking about opportunities for like institutional K-12s or KL2s that might be eligible for, with the caveat that might, contribute to your total time on a K. And so, defining what's the appropriate time point to get appointed to such an award just requires a lot of conversation with your mentoring committee and your chief and your chair. So I think just open communication with all the different stakeholders definitely helps.
Thanks, Lila. Also really good ideas and points. I think the question about whether being on an institutional K takes away time from your individual K is something I've heard many times come up. Do you know if anyone, I guess I'm sort of asking like the panel, Boonmi's unmuting, so I feel like she has some experience on this. I will say I was in the PSDP, as Pamela mentioned, and then now I have my own individual K, and they did not hold my PSDP time against me, but I'm at NINDS.
Yeah, I think it's NIH institution specific, and also depends on where the funding for the institutional K comes from. Like, so if it's NIH funded, then because I submitted to NIDDK, and so they have a rule for I think like 6 years total. So it is going to come like the 2 years that I'm on, or whatever, 1 year plus that I've been on the institutional K is going to come out of that 6 years. And it's something I had heard like a long time ago and didn't necessarily keep in mind. I mean, yeah, I think it just is something to kind of consider. Even though I guess 5 years is quite a long time, but could go by pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm also at NIDDK, and I only got 4 years for my K because of the PSDP. So I think it really is institution specific.
Yeah, I'm at NIAID, and they do not have they do not include any institutional K time on your total K. So yeah, you just have to think about which institute you're applying for and know what their max limit is.
I think it just speaks to then you're going to have to put in your R's and your DP2s earlier on your K, which is just, the way it goes. That's the next stage. I was so relieved when I got my K, and then I heard somebody who had 3 R's before the end of their K, and I thought, I'm not on that trajectory. So yeah, there's always more to do. That's the exciting thing about research, right? Boonmi, you want to talk about the NIH loan repayment program? Because I also think that's very important to discuss in this setting.
Yeah, I think so too, because I mean, like for some, at least for me, something I was considering was like during this time, like the transitional period between fellowship and faculty, like you're really taking sort of like a paid decrease and trying to find ways to kind of make up for it if you have large loans. was NIH LRP, which I think I applied to the pediatric research one. It's ends up being $100,000 over 2 years, and you can, as long as you're doing research and you have loans that exceed that amount, you can reapply. And I think like overall they give about 50% of people who apply, but most people who apply need to do so multiple times. And I think I got it on the second attempt. And I have a colleague here who got it on the third attempt. So definitely worth looking into. The cycle for like application is currently open if anyone is interested, and you can actually apply, like if you're in fellowship, you can apply as early as fellowship as long as you get an application. And I think it's good experience to like sort of grant writing, and it can be something, even if you already have another grant, it can be, you know, a proposal that you've already written for something else.
Thank you. Yeah, I have many colleagues who also had a similar experience where they applied multiple times and then were ultimately successful. But yeah, I think that's key to know about. There was also a little bit of follow-up to the earlier discussions from Shayla, and I'll just read your questions, but feel free to unmute and correct me. So do some fellows with robust research experience apply for a K during fellowship, or is this too early?
This somewhat touches on what I think the next section, but since you're asking it now, I can talk to that a little bit. I think it depends on the applicant. I think and then somewhat depends on your situation and what grant you're applying for. So just to break that down a little bit, you know, if you've been if you've had a very successful project, you know, with a mentor during your fellowship years, that's led to, you know, a publication or two, and you know, you're proposing to kind of apply for a K where you're going to stay with the same K mentor, and you have it pretty well worked out what your project will be and how you're differentiating yourself from your mentor, and that's kind of already solidified for you, then I think it is possible to apply for that during fellowship. I know of a few people who have done that, and with varying levels of success. So it's definitely possible, is what I would say. And I think when you're kind of in that position, if you have a good track record of success there too, kind of a grant to keep in mind too is, aside from the K08, you also could consider the K99 R00. I know of 1 or 2 people that have gotten that award, and they got it towards the end of fellowship. And part of the reason I would mention that there too is that award in particular, it has a pretty strict timeline and criteria for when you can apply. So you need to be a certain number of years out from your terminal degree, and you also have to be in a pre-faculty position. So if you're a fellow or an instructor, I think technically you can still apply for that award. But if you've already joined the faculty or an assistant professor, you wouldn't be eligible for that particular award. But that's just for the K99. For the more traditional K, you've got more flexibility on when you can apply for it. What I've seen more recently from a lot of different physician scientists, and when they've applied for the K, is that almost uniformly what I've seen is that if there is not a paper with your mentor, or like a very, very strong track record of productivity, then the Ks are just getting not scored. And then when I've seen those people come back and they do have like a mid to high level publication with their mentor, and are basically sending in almost the same application as they're getting funded. So I think that's probably a key criteria, are if you've got something published or like very near being accepted when you're looking to send in that K.
Yeah, also, you know, very important points, great perspective, segueing nicely into our next bullet point, which is K funding, but we'll go back because there's a T32 question in the chat as well. Yeah, I guess also just to offer one more perspective, because Dr. Kalish isn't here, and he's also, he has started his own lab as well. I also did the accelerated research path, and so I had 4 years of fellowship. My postdoctoral mentor was a pathologist, and those folks are physician scientists training machines. Like, they know exactly when to have you apply for everything. And so I put in my first K in my 3rd year of fellowship. got a score but not funded, and then got funded on my second round, which was almost when I finished fellowship. But I have a PhD, so I had a previous track record of publications, and in addition, I was sort of branching off from my PhD work. And so the previous publications were kind of in the same area. So I think I was able to build into that in a way that others may or may not be able to. Okay, I think, because we have time, maybe we can talk a little bit more about T32s and F32s, because that's also a common and high yield funding mechanism. Lila?
Yeah, sure. So T32s are really grants that are specific to an institution and are usually themed. At WashU, we have like a T32 for training pediatric physician scientists. There's a T32 for pulmonary medicine, a T32 for gastroenterology, pediatric gastroenterology. And essentially each of these T32s have a certain number of spots to support like a finite number of usually fellows and sometimes early career faculty. And it provides some salary support and then a very small amount of like extra funding that you can use in the lab. So these are with the intention of staying within a mentor's lab. But I think one of the biggest benefits is that it essentially gives you a mandate to have protected clinical time versus research time. And so being on a T32, as a fellow or early career faculty kind of guarantees you greater than 75% research time. An F32, in contrast, is something that you would individually have to apply for, but it's a mentored grant that does provide some salary support and additional research funding. It's more of a fellowship grant. So it's with the intention of staying within the mentor's lab throughout the duration of the F32. But you can, depending on the institution, you can, I had my F32 in my last year of fellowship and then into my first year as an attending, and again, guaranteed me protected research time. There are some restrictions with it though, like you have to stay within the institution or stay with your mentor to retain that funding. So if you're, graduating fellowship, it, might define whether or not you can leave, and apply for a job elsewhere if you want to retain that F32 funding. But gives you good grant writing practice as well.
Thanks, Lila. That was a wonderful tutorial to those two funding mechanisms. My institution did have an F32 that we lost while I was a fellow. So I was also funded on that. No, sorry, the T32. That's the whole point, right? The T32 is the institution, the F32 is the individual. Funding mechanisms that I'm clearly less familiar with. So thank you for sharing your expertise. Yeah, I think so. The T32s are something that like program directors and things are working on those applications to be able to fund a number of fellows exactly on the topic. Okay. I think maybe we'll get back to K's. Shayla also has a very important and juicy question about salaries, but we'll wait for us all to warm up a little bit more before we get into that. But that is, I think, something that it's important to be aware of how research faculty get funded often. John, did you have other comments that you wanted to make on, applying for a K or your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I can say from personal experience too, and this might relate to somebody, but as far as that, like timing was, as I mentioned, I'd seen several people without a paper from their mentor not get it funded. So our approach was to wait for a paper to get accepted. And so then there's a catch-22 there, depending on how you play it, in that the first time I submitted a K then based on that, based on that paper getting accepted, was that the response from the reviewers was, oh, well, you don't need a K. You've already gotten, great experience on this sort of project and with your mentor. So no, thank you. So you have to be careful again with that. And that was a good learning opportunity though, as well, to kind of say, it's not just that you've, been able to be productive from a research standpoint, but that you're able to really differentiate yourself from your mentor and be able to, write a compelling grant that's on a, on a totally different topic. So when I went and applied the next time, I essentially just changed the topic completely and learned from that approach. And so then I was more successful with the second go around. So, you know, I'm just making people aware of there's kind of a fine line you need to walk between being qualified for it and not being overqualified for it. And you have to, and a lot of that's just like the grantsmanship and your ability to explain what's new, what's different from your mentor, you know, bring in different, you know, either co-mentors or collaborators that are very different than what you've published on before. And they'll kind of bring you into new areas of your science. And I think you'll be on solid footing.
That's really insightful. Thank you for sharing your experience. Bunmi, do you want to go next? Because I know you're almost there, or if you don't want to share yet, that's okay too.
When to apply? I think that the timing sort of varies. I'm looking at the next question and someone saying about pursuing a master's in clinical, like essentially asking about the timing. So my story is a little bit different in that I had never actually done any sort of basic or translational research before fellowship. So fellowship was really sort of like the first time. And once I got into the lab, I was really excited about it and kind of wanted to continue that project and see where it would go. But I opted to kind of focus on building a research background and getting publications and doing those kind of things versus getting any additional research training, because I felt like that was helpful. And so the first time I went to submit a KOA, the comment I got was that you don't have a publication record. Right. So like I'd had a paper at that point with my mentor, but I didn't have really any other papers. And even though I had like some external, like small foundational grants, so, and then the second time I resubmitted, I think I had one or two other publications in that specific area that I was interested in, and that was helpful. So I think it's all sort of like there's central themes among like different people's careers, but overall there's like a little bit of nuance to each sort of individual path. But that's sort of how I ended up here.
Yeah, I just wanted to amplify that you don't have to have research experience going into fellowship to be a successful neonatal physician scientist. One of my mentors who I can give a shout out to is Fernando Gonzalez, who's on this call, who's now doing some really impactful, you know, basic translational science and started doing research and fellowship. You know, that's what it's for, actually, to pursue your scholarly interests. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, also seems like you're doing very well.
Yeah, my hats off to Misty because I met her early on and she had a similar story. So I was like, if she can do it, then maybe I can.
Yeah, no, you can do anything you want to do. I was learning to pipette when I was a second year fellow, so you can definitely do it. So thanks for that.
John, did you want to add on?
Oh, sorry, no, I didn't.
Yeah, no worries. Maybe we'll go to Pamela.
Yeah. You know, I think one thing to remember when you're writing grants is that they're going to be read by humans and people people are going to, you know, respond to what you write differently. And so, you know, I had one publication with my mentor and a very small publication record, and it was brought up in all of my grant applications as something to work on. And so, you know, I took that and put it into my training plan, which is to write more papers and to get more stuff out. And I think, you know, if you have an idea and you have a sense of how you want to do it and you have some preliminary work, I don't think there's a harm in trying as best as you can to get your K out, you know, as soon as it seems feasible. And then you address your weaknesses as you go. You say, I realize I don't have, you know, as many publications as I should. These are the things that I'm doing to work on it. This is how I'm going to get myself up to the next level. And then to speak a little bit to that same question about, you know, training before or after, the K is a training grant. And I think, you know, you can put into it and even puts funds into some type of master's program or something like that. And I think other people have mentioned this as well, but you want to make sure that what you're proposing to do is a training that you need that'll get you to where you want to be. And so saying I want to do a master's or take X, Y, and Z classes is a really great thing to put into a K award. That's part of the point, is that you're training to get to your next level, which, obviously traditionally is bigger grants with more money and more sort of support to do the types of studies you want to do. And so I think I was always nervous about putting these grants in, given I have so few publications. But I recognized those as weaknesses, as did my reviewers, and eventually, we got there. And I think when I got my K, my paper wasn't published yet, but it was basically accepted with minor revisions.
Pamela, thank you. I think, those are lots of really nice example of what I would call savvy grantsmanship. And it is sort of in just knowing how to craft your story. I think one more anecdote, just to give my own experience. We put in my K before my major publication with my postdoc mentor was ready to go, with the intention that if that was a major critique, that we would submit that and have it further along for the resubmission, and that's a very addressable criticism. So we sort of put that out as reviewer bait, as some people say, as something that we could address. And actually, Dr. Sally Permar, who's phenomenal physician scientist who's the chair of pediatrics at Weill Cornell, she's talked about how you can in fact do a bioarchive now if you need to increase your publication record. So I think that's another tip. Okay, well, apologies for adding in my own 2 cents there. And then finally transitioning, I think, into getting our first research into your first research job. And John, I have you starting us off with how to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for including me here. I think it's there's honestly, all the things that we're talking about are really like leading you towards this point. So it's hard to say there's a lot to do that's different here, other than like continue to grind on what you've been doing. I think you're going to be the kind of the way my mentor had phrased things was kind of the more work you're putting in up front and the more productive you are as far as your publications and like grant funding are kind of like altering the trajectory from when you launch, right? And when you launch your independent career, you want to be able to launch at like that steepest trajectory you can, to be able to have a good, startup package and funding so that, you're able to, get working on multiple different projects or, multiple people on the same project that's going to really launch that research career. So, all the things we're talking about are really the things to do to get you there. So continuing, once you are, K funding, continuing just to, you just got to work hard and continue to get publications out. We've talked about a lot of the different, NIH grant mechanisms, but, aside from that, there's also lots of different foundation awards. I think for physician scientists, things like the Burroughs Wellcome, and then there's as neonatologists here, a lot of like we apply for like would qualify for like March of Dimes grants as well. So those types of foundation awards, I think, are also important to be to keep in mind. And if you have an applicable proposal, to send something in on those too. And I think those types of things give you a good track record for success and kind of help, the people that will be, reviewing your application and investing in you as young faculty to really, want to give you the most robust startup you can. I think the other thing that I don't know how much we want to get into it, but sometimes the way to negotiate those types of like startup packages are to have multiple offers too. And so, that you can kind of have your, if there's something from one institution that outcompetes another one, to come back to, that place you're interested in and say, hey, they're offering me this, can you match it? So, I mean, that's a powerful negotiating tool when you are looking to try to, which job you're going to take when you're first starting, is to be able to, if you have multiple offers, if you're in that type of situation, then that can be beneficial too.
Thank you. Many good points from your personal experience. So appreciate you sharing. Pamela, do you want to talk about, so I think John talked about applying for a research job with funding, which I will say, like, as I've, recently done this, looking for a research position in the past few years too, it was a question I was explicitly asked, are you coming to us with any funding? So just be aware that it is something that's discussed. And a K counts. So that's something that I had at the time. But Pamela, I think, it's really important to talk about the other perspective too, how to apply for a research job without a grant.
Thank you, Betsy. Yeah, I was so excited to have this be something that we talked about, but I wanted to be fully honest in that I stayed at my home institution, and actually, as I was part of the Pediatric Scientist Development Program, sort of didn't do a lot of looking at other institutions. But a lot of my friends have pursued physician scientist careers, and so I had lots of chats with them over the past 24 hours, sort of about their experiences and sort of thinking about some of the stuff that the other Dr. Good and I had discussed years ago, and some other mentors. And I think we may actually get to some of the questions about sort of instructor versus assistant professor and salary that can be nuanced in here. So anyone else who wants to jump in with their experiences, feel free. But to apply for a research job without a grant, I think it can be challenging. And, I think one of the most important things, and we're going to get to this a lot at the end, is about making sure that you're applying for a job that you want at an institution where you're going to have good mentorship. So if you're staying at your home institution, that makes it really easy. You probably already have a home mentorship team with projects that are already up and running. But if you are looking to leave your home institution and you would like a research job and you don't have any grant funding, you really need someone who can mentor and support you. And so going in knowing what you want to study and having already had conversations with potential mentors is going to be really essential. And so my friends who have done this have gone and interviewed at institutions after already having found either clinical or sort of lab research mentors who are willing to take them on. And after having had really, frank and serious conversations about what that mentorship relationship might look like. And I think that can be really hard to do, especially if you don't know people, but we all have great mentorship in our own home institutions. And so being able to leverage the relationships that you have now to sort of help build your network out as you're going to look for other jobs can be really essential. And then I think, as John was saying, being clear about sort of what you're going to bring to the table, what you plan to do. And it can be helpful to even have a timeline about things like what types of grants you're going to apply for, what your K timeline is personally. And then sort of having honest conversations as well as what that then would look like in terms of the type of job you're getting, the amount of protected time you're going to have, and what the salary support will look like.
Thank you, Pamela. Yeah, all also very good points. I'll add on to discuss about, as you touched on, moving to a new institution versus staying. I have a colleague who is on the job market currently and was recently asking me about, how to be genuine about looking for jobs at other institutions. I think John mentioned that it's certainly strategic to have more than one offer, and it is helpful, I think, to make sure that you're appropriately valued wherever you go. But, I think just to add on some other perspectives, that interviewing at outside institutions, it grows your network. When I was interviewing, I made contacts and I made colleagues and friends, and now I have collaborations with places that I interviewed where I ended up not taking the position. But it was, there were fantastic institutions that I was very sincere about potentially, landing there. And I find that played out very well. So, I think even if you're interested in staying where you've trained, it is absolutely appropriate to look for other offers, both because it's strategic, but also because it will make you a better connected scientist long-term, and that will also benefit wherever you land. We've had such a, nice discussion. I think Boonmei was wonderful and put into one of the highlights of the session that we needed to talk specifically about mentorship. And so I wanted to give her the floor kind of to wrap up on that topic because it's super important. And so please take it away.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like we've kind of all touched on it at various points, right? Right, having a strong mentor to help you sort of decide when the next step is to apply for this grant, or when you're trying to decide about moving from one institution to another or versus staying. And I think that for those who are still in fellowship, this might be the first time that you're looking at, trying to pick a new mentor, or maybe you're trying to decide, if this path is like as a physician scientist is the right one. So certainly like reaching out to a variety of different people, asking, this forum is a great opportunity to see what it's like at different stages. But definitely kind of staying connected with people who are in the same field or in the same sort of career path. Luckily for me, when in fellowship, when I was sort of like choosing a mentor, I ended up in a lab of someone who's a physician scientist, but who's also a neonatologist. And that seemed to be sort of like a good balance for me, right? Because it's nice to have someone who understands the balance it is between being a physician and being a scientist. So, yeah.
I'll just add that I think having like a diverse mentor committee or group or panel that you can bounce ideas off of, and whether they're in your division or not, or in your department or not, I think can be super informative to get different perspectives. And then on top of that, I think like a peer mentoring network is also really helpful. I have found a lot of helpful advice from folks that are just a few years ahead of me on the same pathway, to get an idea of, these different timeline questions that have been brought up today. When is the right time for any of these different steps along the way can be helpful, to talk to folks that have just been in your shoes just a few years prior.
Well said. Yeah, Lila and Bunmi. Well, I think that could be the topic of another full hour, but we'll leave it there for now. Okay, we'll take one quick question from the chat, which is how long do you have to apply for a K grant after fellowship? In total transparency, I don't know that there's a discrete number. So for the K99, there is likely a discrete number, and it's short. I think for my PhD friends, it's 4 years after finishing your PhD. But for the K08, it's different because, as physicians, our training path is sometimes nonlinear. So I don't know that there is a discrete number. Pamela's unmuting. Maybe she can help me.
Your division and department may give you guidance. So what my offer letters, so my contracts gave me a timeline, and I think I had 3 years to get funding that was significant, either a K08 or its equivalent, before I would lose my protected time. And that seems to be common, at least at my institution, and it's worth asking at your home institution and within your division, other people who've been through the process, what that looked like for them. And I appreciated that. Actually, I'm glad that they told me that was the expectation, and that would be how, I would have this much protected time for this many years to get to this next level. And I don't know. I mean, maybe the other Dr. Good can mention whether that's common where she is as well. I'm not sure.
I think I'll just add, I think it depends on your division chief and your chair, and how much they're really invested in your success, and then how much they're able to do financially. So I would just say, if people are going on the job market, those are questions that you really want to ask, because 3 years goes by really fast. I mean, 5 years for your K goes by really fast. But I would say the 3 years, especially if you're moving institutions or even changing mentors, all that time goes really fast. You have to learn new techniques, new protocols and labs, et cetera. And then, getting a paper out before you can submit with your mentor or at your, new institution is important. I think that's really the limit. It's not the NIH limit. Like, there has been people, I have somebody in my division who got a K, and they're 5 years out, and they just, we just promoted them to an associate professor. So, prior to the K, actually. So I think it just depends on the individual's trajectory and how they're doing. And I think when it comes to protected time, you just want to make sure as the years go by that your salary will be supported, because from a chair level, it's, the RVUs that you generate as a physician scientist are important. And so you don't
Mhm.
have grants, then they want you to be on service. So I think making sure that you have a chief that understands your timeline is really important.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll just segue from there. So I guess, you know, to summarize, I think you should target by 3 to 5 years after fellowship to put in your K. Okay, but then transitioning to the very important, you know, aspect of salary, because of course we've all been training for a long time by the time that you're at the end of your fellowship. I can speak to a little bit of the situation at UCSF because it's pretty transparent. So UCSF pays your salary based on the number of clinical weeks that you're on service. And as research faculty, I'm 20% time on service. So that's the amount of my salary that comes from my clinical work. And technically, the rest of my salary is I'm responsible for to make up from my grants. There are lots of ways to make this work. UCSF has I think a very supportive policy for physician scientists that once you have a K, they fund your salary. So they take the amount of money from your K, they add your clinical time, and then the difference, and there is a difference as an assistant professor in neonatology, the department supports. I think that that's actually a pretty supportive model at that time point, but there is the question, of course, of what people do pre-K. And then I made it up by other grant mechanisms, but you can also negotiate with your division chief for funding. This is, I think, an important topic, so I'll just let somebody else chime in here.
Yeah, I can just say our department of pediatrics approaches it almost the same way, that you're responsible for your salary. That's whatever percent you are clinical will be paid for, but the research part of it, yeah, you have to. And similarly, you can pay it out of your K, and they make up the difference. But yeah, after that, and the goal is to be be able to support your own salary. So typically, the end the end goal after about 5 or 6 years is what it is to basically have 2 R01 equivalents, so that you're fully that's what we would consider like fully independent, so that you're able to support your own salary.
Misty or David might also have perspectives on this.
I can add something. I'll just, from my early career stages, I was at the University of Pittsburgh, and then when I started my lab, I was at WashU. I can say that each division chief and chair, depending where you're at, does it a little bit differently, but I was really fortunate enough to have, to not have to even worry about any of this. And I think Lila would probably say the same. At WashU, we never had like, oh, you have to get 60% or 80% funding for your salary. So I would just caution and say it is institutional specific. I also try to shield my early career faculty from that additional stress. And it's my job as a chief to worry about it. I think you have enough to worry about with trying to get your K. Those pre-K years that we've talked about are really difficult. So if your institution has a K-12 or a physician scientist institutional award, like Lila mentioned, those are things that are vital to your success. And try to get on them, keep trying, or KL2 or whatever it is, try to get on them, because I think as soon as you can fund your salary, you will feel better and you can focus then on the science. Now, if you're at a center that is like, you have to get, like John mentioned, like 2 R1s by year 6. I mean, that's the type of stress that I think if I had when I was, at your guys' stage, I would have probably crumbled. So, and it ended up being fine, but I think when you are stressed about your own funding and paying your own salary, I think it takes away from the joy of discovery, and really focusing on good science is the most important, because that'll get you publications and then that'll get you grants. I'll stop there.
I do find that leadership makes a big difference here. Mary Leonard is a PEDS department chair at Stanford, and she has a Bridge to K program where physician scientists have internal funding that supports the difference in their salary for, I think, up to 3 years, so that they can get their K. And that's a competitive program, or at least a program where you have to put together a research grant. So you have to be smart and be, already have had some success to apply for it. So I thought that was really exciting and thoughtful when I heard about that program that she created and runs. this has been so fun and informative, and our hour is up. So, thank you so much to all of our panelists, to Misty and David, to Patrick, who I think has been also an enabler of this, of sessions from the ONTPD, and to TCAN, who's also provided a lot of the inspiration behind these events. I'll offer a quick plug for our next session. Let me advance, there we go, which is going to be on the topic of starting a research lab, moderated by Dr. David McCulley. So put this on your calendars, look for the invites to follow. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions. Please feel free to tweet or X me, or however we refer to that social media channel these days. I'm pretty active there, and I find it can be a good way to get in touch. And I'm happy to try to answer your questions. And Jonathan, we know each other, so we'll talk about K99s and KO8s. Thank you again for coming. Look forward to interacting with you all in the future. Take care.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
Thanks, Betsy.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.